Okay.
And we're live,
Stay
I
in.
think.
Game time, Ramon. Stay in.
Game time. We're staying in. So with us right now, we have the epitome of a nerdy neuroscientist by the guise of Dan Gallucci.
It's nice to be here, Mark. How are you? Ramon, how are you? Everybody out there, how are you?
Doing great. And Mark says that obviously tongue in cheek, guys, because Dan is an expert in his field, in the field of neuroscience. As also was a professional athlete, which I didn't know. What did you play, Dan?
I was a footballer, a real footballer, not the American style. I was a soccer player.
Traveling Europe.
For a number of years.
Europe with a shot at the Premiership.
Many moons ago. Many moons ago.
And a cage fighter?
No, that was a failed attempt. Post soccer, I needed something to do post football, but thankfully I was drawn away from that before I could hurt myself too badly.
And your immortal line is, I've been obsessed with the brain for 20 years, and we know bugger all about it.
Pretty much. I've kind of been obsessed with performance and sort of trying to be at the highest level possible, obviously first trying to be as a player. And then really it's just been a range of curiosities that sort of led me from first a strength and conditioning coach, then the exercise physiologist, then an osteopath, then a clinical neuroscientist. I still consider myself primarily like a coach of trying to help players and primarily athletes perform at a high level, and just have been trying to widen my tool set to be able to gather as many tools as I possibly can to do so.
It's very interesting to have clinical, seriously now, no joke, very interesting to have clinical and neuroscientists in the same sentence. There can't be too many of you that are clinical neuroscientists.
I don't think there's not a ton, and I think that while it's good in certain contexts, it's provided some barriers to the way a lot of things typically want to run. But we're working our way through it and have had a bunch of fun along the way. So again, it's just great to be able to be here and have
we
this
love
little
you,
chat.
and thank you for your time. Today we're talking about trauma, and people say I over-exaggerate, but you can see on court at the US Open with people going crazy or smashing their rackets when a big point doesn't go their way. To me, that's experiential trauma. And for our amateur tennis players, it means so much when you are about to cross the line, but you don't cross the line. I think it impacts upon your psyche, your identity, your story, who you think you are, what you think you're capable of, and that's trauma. What do you think about that? Am I overdoing it?
No, I think it's, the interesting thing is I think just putting it in the proper context. So I think in the one realm of, if we're looking at things from a relative perspective, it's like, sure, you could say that point doesn't matter so much in the grand schemes of me being able to live harmoniously with my wife and my children being healthy and things along those lines. Like, those are the obvious sort of like caveats to the context of that behavior. Yeah. But I think in the aspect of why many of us play sport, and some of us don't, but why many of us play sport, why a lot of the people I work with play sport, it is for a living, or it is because they derive such immense levels of satisfaction that it becomes a part of their identity. So when we're looking at it from those perspectives, then it is nothing, well, I wouldn't say it's nothing other than trauma, but trauma plays a huge part of it. And what I think people sometimes need to really get an understanding of, something we're trying to work with every day, is that trauma then just doesn't become a figment of somebody's imagination or this construct of quote unquote the mind. Trauma actually lays physical, structural, and functional changes to the characteristics that have sometimes irreversible changes in the brain itself, so that there's actual physical there's actual physical correlates that you can look at that relate to trauma, and then that's there. And that starts, that's, fortunately, unfortunately, I think it's fortunate because I think there's ways to use it. This is something that's been embedded in evolution. This has been embedded in biology via evolution for hundreds of millions of years. So to almost deny that there can be a biological foundation for it would be a bit sort of like, it would be massively incorrect.
Would that mean that the next time you're in a trauma situation, the brain goes, oh, and you have a self-fulfilling prophecy just so the brain can let you off the hook?
It's interesting.
How can you overcome it?
Yeah, I think it's, and we've had this discussion before. This is something I've been working on a lot over the last few years at various levels: pro sport, amateur sport, outside of sport, rehabilitation, in the workplace, things along those lines. I think back to the fundamental levels of it, and anybody that's been here before that's maybe heard some of the chats we've had before knows that I really try to look at things from a fundamental sort of first principles perspective and then build up from that foundation there. While those points undoubtedly exist, that these feelings that we get that seem to be embedded in our psyche, they no doubt exist. I think that there becomes an overemphasis basically on just the psychological side of trauma when we're looking at it from that perspective. So it's like, you look at what's wrong with the person's mind, or how do we coach the mind, in the world of sports psychology, which is great in some ways. You can have all the cognitive behavioral therapy, the classical conditioning, the habit forming, the identity building. You can do all those things. But what we've totally forgot out of the equation is that trauma, or however we want to contextualize it, being able to win at those critical moments, that also has very much the physical manifestations, as you were kind of alluding to. Pupils widen, heart rate to the periphery increases, digestion shuts down, cognition highlights for a minute and then it shuts down. Like, there's all these physical characteristics that actually happen. And then what becomes hugely, hugely important, and something that, again, we're working with every day, is that we sometimes want to contextualize these things and make them very different. So traditionally, we want to optimize for very different objectives. So, okay, well, I'm in this environment right now. I have to be able to get this serve in. I have to be able to get this first serve in to be able to do this. And to do so, my rotator cuff has to do this and my eyes have to do this. So we've taken a very reductionist look at the way we try to optimize for what it is that we're looking at, and to break it down into super, super simple terms. And then again, you guys just tell me to shut up whenever and move on to the next point. But I was thinking about trying to provide like a very simple example. One would be perception, something that in tennis people have looked at all the time. How do I perceive the ball? Perception of just maximizing visual accuracy and maximizing visual reconstruction. I know exactly the trajectory of that ball coming at a particular speed. My retina, my fovea, everything can pick it up. I can see it. So I'm optimizing for quote unquote perception. And then on the flip side, if I were to say, okay, but now I have to turn that into action. So now I have to maximize a motor function. Now I need to be able to have my shoulder open up. I need to be able to have my feet in the right position. I need to be able to have my core doing this. I need to have whatever the nuance of the stuff that you guys would amazingly coach. That's a very different ability. So that requires a different set of objectives and a different set of strategies. And this is where we're coming at it with so many different things. And you take something as dynamic, as chaotic as the sport of tennis, and there's so many different variables there. And again, while it doesn't mean you don't work on these things at the foundational level, at the fundamental level, this all comes from the brain in terms of what you were alluding to before, which is basically that what we should be trying to do is we should be trying to optimize for both perception and action basically at the same time. They have the same objective. And the way that we can do that is like, well, how do you maximize for both? Or how do you do that at the same time when there are different physical traits needed for both? but from the brain perspective, because it starts with the brain. It's like anything that you're going to do thinking wise, anything you're going to do motor wise is happening at the brain first. So what you need to do.
So why don't we train the brain?
I think it's because we don't know really. We've been trying to do it via proxy, which is saying, okay, well, tons of repetition on this, or positive, read these affirmation quotes about this. And while that can have an effect, it's not really getting to the crux of what the brain does to survive. Because again, at the end of the day, the brain doesn't give a shit about whether you want to succeed at tennis or not succeed at tennis or have your brain, ultimately, with 85 billion neurons, it's so energetic. It's taking in, it's consuming 20 to 25% of the calories you take in every day, yet it weighs 2.2% of your body weight. It's like, it's a highly energetic creature that just cares about its own survival. So what your brain is going to do is it's going to make a model of the world. So your brain is making a model of the world, and it's already done so. And we can go through an example of how it does it. It's making a model of the world, and how different you are performing to that model is creating sort of this distress that we see. So what we call it is we're looking at surprise minimization from a brain level. So the more I can create a proper model in the brain, and the more that the data that's being fed in the environment matches that pre-existing model that I have in the brain, I've minimized surprise. Minimizing surprise means I'm more efficient. I'm more efficient, which means I've got a greater chance to win, which means I've got a greater chance of success. What we're trying to do is, from both those same objectives, perception and action, the brain is trying to minimize surprise. How it's doing that is that the brain has already created a model. Then we can get into, well, how do I fix the model? But you've created a model. So now all I need to do is create synergy within the model of the world and what I'm seeing in the outside world. And then that leads me to the performance that I'm trying to get. So to make it almost tongue in cheek, it's like, if I go home after work today and my wife is on the couch with my son, there's no surprise there. It's minimal surprise. I can go on, I can be very efficient, I can make dinner, I can do what I need to do. If I go home and my wife is sitting beside the Amazon driver on my couch, now all of a sudden, knock on wood, now all of a sudden I've got this maximal sense of surprise. I wasn't expecting that. It kicks in all these hormones, it kicks in all these other mechanisms that says, hey, your model of the world versus what you're seeing right now are so incongruent that you got to figure some shit out. And so what we're trying to constantly do is minimize surprise by instilling habits or whatever it is that we want to do to create a model that then matches what's in the real world.
Okay.
Sorry,
so,
that was probably too long.
No, just led perfectly into clutch training. So if you train real match accountability pressure situations on the practice court, that then becomes familiar to the brain. So when you're in that circumstance and it feeds into the brain is like, I know the shit, I'm familiar with it. There's no surprises, we're good to go. That's fair?
100%. And again, you're welcome to share it with your group later. That video that I sent you earlier, where you're basically, we're seeing a woman just trying to move her head back and forth, and we're capturing all this stuff, all this data on a screen. It's basically like, again, your brain's making a model anyways. So if, for example, I say, Mark, on the screen right here, you're looking at a frog, and you're going to watch this frog on the screen while I have you moving your head back and forth. If I were to now try and maximize surprise for Mark and put him under a stressful situation, kind of, but just kind of kidding around, what does a frog do from a motor perspective? If you said, okay, what does a frog do? Ramon or Mark, what does a frog typically do?
It hops.
It hops, right? So you've already, nobody's had to tell you that. You've built this into your mind already. So the funny thing is, when we're watching in this video I'd sent to Mark, but again, it doesn't matter with the video, I can tell you, it's like, if I have somebody just looking at a screen and now they're like, oh, okay, they're watching this frog and then it hops. But their instructions have been, keep your eyes on this object, keep your eyes on this object. And we're measuring in real time as this object now is hopping. It's a frog. So the brain understands frog. The brain almost expects the frog to hop. So when I'm measuring how fast can the eyes move to that target, it can happen, in less than 250 milliseconds. The eyes can jump, hit the target, jump, hit the target, jump, hit the target. The fucking beauty about the brain is that again, it's like how our brain is creating these models. Now, if you sub out the frog and you just put an apple there, but you don't expect an apple to jump, so it creates a delay. You can force the apple to go at the same trajectory to the same locations at the same speed and tell the same instruction: follow the goddamn object, just follow it with your eyes. But because your brain doesn't have a model that understands that apples jump, it creates a mismatch. And that mismatch is a 1/10 of a second delay in terms of the neural performance. That has nothing to do with, I trained this, I did the eye light drills, and it's the way that your brain makes models. So how do we make the brain make models? Great thing is, if you've already got high-level athletes, they're generally making pretty good models themselves. But where does the model break down? Where does the model not work so well? Why does the model not work so well in this particular environment? And then you can look into building around those sorts of strategies there.
I'm just going to switch gears for the moment now. Can trauma be the other side of the coin, i.e. addictive and great? And you could argue that Alcaraz and Djokovic not only come alive when they're in this dog-eat-dog, eat your heart out, every point counts, traumatic battle.
It's like the trauma that you would engage in. It's the beauty of the way that our central nervous systems have evolved. This is no different than a tiny multi-celled organism, Amphioxus, from 600 million years ago versus Carlos or Novak on the court right now. It's the output from a central, let's even call them neurons in those 600 million years ago. Let's not even worry about primates. Let's go way back. The establishment of those first brain cells, which did arise 600, 700, 800 million years ago. It was always trying to optimize for efficiency. So what does that mean? Is that you can have that acute state of trauma. You can have that acute state of stress. You can have that acute state of however you want to contextualize it, but it has to be short. And the reason that it has to be short is because you can't leave that switch flipped on for too long, or else, again, it's it's too energetically demanding. So what's the best about guys at that level? And I don't know either one, but I've worked with some people at that level in a variety of sports. It's that they're able to turn it on exactly at that moment. It's like when that gazelle needs to be able to get away from that lion within 9 or 10 seconds and is able to do so and can do it all at the right time, it does it and then it rests. And then it does it and then it rests. And the same thing here. The guy that's running that 100 meters at the Worlds that has to be able to turn on every aspect of his automatic flight or fight system at that moment can only do it at that moment. If he's been doing that in the 3 hours leading up to that race, there's zero chance that he wins. So it's when you can turn that on at the right moment, and understanding the context of those moments is key to delivering at that time.
I got a question, Dan. So we've all had the experience where you go into a match and, maybe you're up big and you choke away the match. And this leaves a very strong long-term memory that people then can replay and feel the same chemistry within the confines of that emotion. And that can influence how they perform the next time. So I guess a practical question is, because if you've played tennis long enough, you've gone through that. How can you use that as fuel practically? How can you change the meaning of what it means? Like, what are some ways that people can process that trauma?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We see that in multiple sports. I think it becomes ever more, I don't want to say the word paralyzing, but it can become somewhat paralyzing, especially in individual sport where you don't have a cacophony of players around you to sort of rely on at times when you're not feeling sort of up to it. Again, I think the first aspect of it is, it's like the great Charles Sherrington from back in the day, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. I think you have to define the problem first is like, okay, the reality is, let's face reality and understand, again, we don't need to be too nerdy about this, but I think it's fascinating. If you look at, if anybody wants to look up like Bayes, B-A-Y-E-S, it's an Englishman, like good old Marco here. Thomas Bayes. If you look up Bayesian brain or Bayesian inference or things like that, we now know unequivocally, this is beyond sort of neuroscience, like computer modeling's now taught us this, because this is how we're modeling brains moving forward. When we're looking at like, okay, well, modeling things like in artificial intelligence or machine learning or synthetic biology, trying to get an understanding of brain works so that we can model these things. You look at this thing called Bayesian inference, which is like, okay, all that data is 100% being built into the brain. So to pretend, it wasn't a big deal, it didn't really matter, forget about it. Like, no, you can say that, but your brain's not going to do that, because your brain is actually using that data to make a model of what's going to happen next time. So this is, again, the beauty of it, is like, yes, you can be creating this self-defeatist sort of model, but then what you need to do is you need to be able to put it in the context of like, it's funny because we've literally done this with athletes, but it's like, okay, I understand that my brain has built that, but what I can do is I can actually almost like they would tell you in sort of like neuro-linguistic programming jargon, which is like, you can almost cut some of those circuits and then reinforce them with other behaviors to build another model. So again, the beauty about neuroplasticity and things that Mark and you have discussed about before, which is like the brain's flexibility, which is what makes it so goddamn fascinating, and fantastical in the same way, is that it's constantly updating this model. You have to make a new world. Imagine this, everybody. You have to make a new visual world every 250 milliseconds. Every 250 milliseconds, you're constantly making a new world from what's around you. So understand the context of, okay, well, at this moment now, this is a totally new moment. We're building totally new data. We're going to fix a totally new model. So what are we going to do? Okay, to get out of that mind frame, okay, we're going to have you do this. So we're going to say, shut your mouth, breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4, breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4. I want you in your head to count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So go back to the mechanisms. Don't let them ruminate on, oh, are you really going to hit this point? Am I going to hit this point? Where's my foot? Is my foot on the line? Is it behind? Like, get the focus onto the mechanism. So it's like, okay, breathe in this way. Put yourself back in that state where you need that automatic nervous system to run in. Okay, I need to be in a better state. Okay, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Keep my mouth closed. 4, 4. Another trick would be same thing. This is again the beauty of having to watch these things over time. Is like in the acute state. Oh shit! Here it goes again. Oh, I'm screwing up again. Oh, I fucked up again. Oh, I'm down another break point again. It's like, okay, you've got that model going in your head. What actually happens is for the first few seconds, your eyes get super honed in. They get super able to stabilize. And they're like, ooh, because it's worried about like, okay, just like that gazelle, maybe I need to be able to run through the trees here. I need proper vision. The problem is as soon as that's happened for now more than a few seconds or even a few minutes, and if you've been ruminating these thoughts for the last 3 games, worrying about this set, it's like now all of a sudden my gaze is unstable. So I can't even stabilize my eyes anymore, which now is creating a model of before. Unstable world, unsuccessful with my shot making, unsuccessful with my foot plays. It's just, you're always making that new model. So go back to, okay, make a new model. What does it need to be? Stabilize my gaze. Okay, look far, look close. Look far, look close. Look far, look close. Close your mouth, look far, look close. Look far, look close. Do that 5 times. Okay, where do your feet need to be? Okay, my feet are in the right spot. So you can constantly make new models with these tricks, because at the end of the day, and Mark knows this, it's like, what are the 2 things, and I say it all the time, what are the 2 things, like in 20 years, at like all different levels of sport, but being able to be at the highest levels and watching people do what they do, the 2 things that matters most are like, okay, you need that fierce level of competition. If you're not a fierce fucking competitor, it's game over. You're never going to win at the level you want to win. And then number 2, it's like, what is that internal voice telling you that nobody else can hear? And the guys and girls that can do that well, and it's chaotic. It's always going to be chaotic in there, but you can override the chaos to be
The
able to go
whisper.
and say, build a model. What's my model? My model's this: stabilize my gaze, stop my breath. Okay, I'm a killer now because I'm in the right proper state body. Okay, go. Okay, fine. Just like that quarterback that throws the INT and's got to come back on the next drive. Fine. That data's out and gone. I'm in a new world right now. Every 250 seconds, I'm building a new world. What is my world going to be this time? It's going to be that. And you kind of take, and that's where, again, this model of active inference is one that I think is so fascinating. He's one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, the University College London there. And we've only been doing some stuff with that institute for the last, almost year or so, but it's phenomenal when you see what they're doing. It's great, but there's so much room in the world of sport to actually make it practical. And so, yeah, I think there's so many cool things here, but it's a great question, Ramon, because I think it's a constant struggle. But
can we get into brainwaves? Because I know that being able to self-regulate at the end of the day is the name of the game. We're going to have bad points, we're going to have bad games and matches, and it's the athlete that can regulate their nervous system the best in between points or quarters that's probably going to have the best chance for success. And so where does creative visualization come in? And does that need to be done in an altered brainwave state like the alpha and theta in order to make those new connections so that you're laying down the circuits for that successful act in the future?
Wonderful. You said I'm the scientist, Mark. You called me the scientist.
Sure.
It's like
Just
I'm the
want to
coach.
remind everybody we're talking.
This is why I was so
chemistry.
excited to talk to you, Dan. This is like my favorite topic in the world.
This is like, you mentioned a couple things there, which is super fascinating. We could chat offline about it. I don't know if anybody's interested in this stuff. I find it immensely fascinating because I think a lot of that lays the foundation for what you're seeing, which is, okay, first for the one in terms of like, how do you actually model that, or how do you start implementing that? For me, Mark knows this, I think, in terms of, this is something that I've implemented with my U11s here in the city at Dutch Connections Football Club and other groups, which is like, you have to start getting that level of interoception, understanding internally, the younger, the better. So while it's never too late to start that, what does that even look like? That could be after a training session at any age, but that could be like, okay, let me run through a body scan. So in a very chill, very easy environment, because it's hard to sometimes always throw it in at the moment when you need it. But it's like, again, how do I teach to make a model this way? It's like, okay, training's done. Oh, okay, I'm on my way home. Maybe I'm at home. I finished having dinner. I'm chilling for a minute. It's like, okay, can I go through a little bit of a body scan? How's my right ankle feel? How does my left ankle feel? How's my right knee feel? How's my left knee feel? How does my shoulder feel? How does my core feel? And while I'm doing that, I'm still going through my nice 4-4 or 5-5 or whatever sort of parasympathetic breathing. There's thousands of them, whatever parasympathetic breathing protocol you want to go through. Generally, the exhale needs to be longer than the inhale. Going through sort of a restorative, sort of like, okay, let me put myself into a resting, digesting, parasympathetic, nervous system state through a proper breathing protocol, and I'm connecting sort of this interoceptive sense back into my brain, back into my body, back into my thought process. I think then what emerges from that in terms of this field of emergence is then you start to see what you'd call the natural rhythms of the brain working basically how they're designed. So this is where I'd sometimes say the world of, and I've had them and I have them. It's like you put the EEG on and you measured all these. It's great because you can see these things, but we need to understand that these are just basic correlates of little things that we're looking at that particular moment in time. If I change the sensors or I look at them somewhere else or in a different state, it totally changes. So again, to the basic premise of like, what is something like a body scan and that parasympathetic system do when you're practicing it over and over and over again, just as part of your routine, like anything else, is that it creates sort of the flow that you need from a central nervous system perspective, particularly the parasympathetics, the resting, digesting, which is output from the brain 90 some odd % of the time. Again, it's 90 some odd percent, your brain should be sending outputs that are resting, digesting, resting, digesting. Again, because it only cares about its own survival. It cares about nothing else that you want to do, only its own survival. How do I survive? The brain will talk to the neurons very strongly, to the neurons close to it. So you'll talk about like very fast gamma waves in the hippocampus that are going super, super fast. And it's going to be able to speak very fast in that area in the hippocampus. And then as it goes further and further away, the communication becomes less and less strong. So again, what you can do is you can have this amazing sort of dynamic of, but just by implementing these things from a behavioral standpoint, particularly through the breathing and some other stuff, it's like you can really get what emerges to be this amazing sort of like balanced sort of rhythms, which you'd call rhythms of the brain activity, where then they know when to kick in and when to kind of go in. And yeah, it's super fascinating to see.
Do we have time, Ramon, and say if we don't, to touch on the linkage between the gut and the brain, the second brain and the gut?
I would be here for hours but I know, Dan, you got stuff to do. But I think so on my end for sure. I want to ask you a million questions, but we don't have to do it now.
1 minute.
No, you can. Yeah, we could go a couple more, whatever. Yeah, you can. On the what?
On the second brain, the gut.
Okay, so do you have a particular question because again, I can come at it from any angle. Do you want a particular aspect of that you're looking at?
No. Are there any lessons from Phelps or Usain Bolt or Tiger Woods, people you've been around?
I think that, again, kind of back to that premise of like, what's made those guys so good in those sorts of situations, some of them I've had more experience than others, is that they were able to actually turn it on at the right time. So they understood the context of the behaviors that they were in so that they knew how to perform particularly at the moment. I remembered Usain Bolt at the University of Toronto here. I think he was able to still run sub 10, and it was like just a jog on a chilly night, walk in the park, but he was coming at it with such a level of ease. It's almost like in sprinting when they sometimes tell you you're going to run that 100-meter final at 80%. You're not running it at 100 because 100 is going to tighten you up. It's that same sort of level of efficiency. The amazing thing about the gut-brain axis is that sort of second brain from an evolutionary perspective means a lot of those neurochemicals, a lot of those hormones that you have from a brain perspective are also sort of actually very physically residing in your gut. So one of them, like even just a take-home strategy from a parasympathetic standpoint, again, because we're wanting to be in parasympathetics a lot of the time. You're not going to do this like in between points at the US Open. You're not going to gargle your Gatorade or whatever it is you're drinking. But when it's like training's done, I have tennis players right now, training's done, and it's like, okay, I got to get back from acute sort of sympathetic state into parasympathetic, and I can use my gut-brain axis to do it because the main driver into the gut is the vagus, a parasympathetic nerve. We tie that behavior, it's anchoring, we tie that behavior into something that already exists, like eating. It's like, okay, every time you eat, you're going to gargle, you're going to put some water in there, and you're going to gargle hard for 10 seconds or so, and you're going to do that 3 times. That's a way to be able to stimulate the vagus, and it seems like it's kind of weird, but stimulating the vagus is what encourages the brain to go into its wonderful inhibitory state of saying, oh, we should do more resting and digesting and saving it for when we need it most and all that kind of stuff. Wow. So that would be just one tidbit on sort of like how you can leverage the gut-brain axis to be able to do something still from a central nervous system perspective.
It's obvious we are in the presence of a master. We have world-class coaches on, and you are world-class coach. I remember fresh out of hospital, you were getting me to gargle in the shower to get the vagus thing going.
Yeah, singing, the humming.
I was humming. Everybody thought I was crazy. Who is that humming, gargling man?
Exactly.
Look, Ramon, do you want to bring it to a close? Because we could be here for hours, which is great for us, but you want to bring it to a close?
Yeah, first of all, Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure.
Guys, if you are watching this on a replay and you have any questions that we didn't get to today, leave them down in the comments. We'll forward them to Dan. We can help get you guys all of the resources that you need to perform at your best. We're going to be coming on again live tomorrow with another fantastic topic. And if you know anybody who would benefit from this information, feel free to share it with them. I think a lot of athletes out there need this knowledge and wisdom. And Dan, where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
At my ice cream pizza shop that I'm in right now. I'm trying. I just started. Jesus, I actually think it's. I'm only on Twitter right now. Just started it. I think it's aperobot_DG. Daniel Gallucci on Twitter. You'll see something probably there. Not really posted anything yet.
We'll get a hold of us and we'll pass it on.
Yeah. That's why I go to Mark, because I'm in now I got to start turning this into other stuff. So yeah, this is why I come to guys like Mark. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. This is super fun. I always love doing so. And hopefully they've got some benefit. And if anybody wants to shoot over any questions, then I'm happy to go through and answer them for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. Appreciate all of your wisdom and knowledge, and especially the sailor tongue, which I have a deep respect for.
Oh, damn.
I love it.
Mark,
we might have to bleep this out on YouTube, but you know what? It doesn't matter. This was all what it was supposed to be. Appreciate you guys. Have an enjoyable rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys.